Welcome to Talk South Asian to Me, Season 2. My name is Michelle.
And my name is Anusha. Tune in every Thursday at 5 p.m. Central and hear us react to each other's stories about mental health and growing up in different South Asian households.
And remember, this podcast is not therapy. Engage with what feels entertaining and resonates with you, and leave what doesn't.
Yay!
Yay! Are you ready for our topic reveal?
Drumroll, please. Da-da-da-da.
We're on letter T, and our topic is triangulation. I feel like we need to all say it together. Ready? Triangulation. It's a long word.
We were in Hogwarts and you were getting me to learn a spell. That's how we said it, so sing-songy.
Yes, that's the teacher in me coming out.
I love that. That's awesome.
Yes. So, this word, very technical, maybe our listeners that are in or have experience in the mental health field probably have heard this, or psychology field, and maybe some people haven't. But let's talk about like kind of what it means. I kind of found a lot of like really good articles from Psychology Today, Simply Psychology, very well-mined articles that were really helpful to really understand the concept of triangulation because it's so abstract.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll be referring to those different articles. The first one I wanted to talk about was Psychology Today, Understanding Triangulation. This was published in 2021. So these are some quotes from this article. Triangulation occurs when two people who are involved in a form of conflictual communication attempt to involve a third party. Examples of this include separated parents who have a difficult relationship and ask their child to share information with the other parent to avoid communicating with each other. Sometimes triangulation can occur without the presence of a third party, such as when a parent uses a threat of the other parent. Wait till your dad sees what you have done, instead of directly expressing their own displeasure and openly communicating with their child. And I really, really appreciate this graphic. We can definitely post this graphic on our Instagram. This is a graphic from Simply Psychology article called Triangulation in Psychology, Impact on Relationships and How to Respond. So triangulation, the shape of a triangle. So the graphic has a triangle, and this triangle has 3 points. One of the points is the victim. The other point is the persecutor, and then the other point is the rescuer. And there's like arrows, two-way arrows going on all 3 sides. But the victim and the persecutor, I can't even pronounce words today. The victim and the persecutor are the two that are having a conflict, and the rescuer is like the one that's being triangulated. And you'll hear me say that word, like experiencing triangulation or being triangulated, which basically means like, being brought in to a conflict that's not directly involved with you. Yeah. So some definitions for those 3 points. The victim has a prey complex. They're like, poor me. Regardless whether they are a victim of or not, they view themselves as oppressed, helpless, sad. They create the triangle. They bring in the others, telling them that they are the victims.
Makes sense, because they're the ones that feel helpless.
Right.
They want help. Okay.
Right. A rescuer works hard and takes care of other people. They have a need to help others to feel satisfied. They want to help the victim, save the victim, aka people pleasers.
I was just thinking that. Yeah.
There you go. And the persecutor is the one that tends to criticize, blame the victim, kind of use the words like, it's all your fault, like those type of phrases. Triangulation is very common, and it can be problematic. So let's kind of talk about like how people, like why people engage in triangulation. And I want to point out that it can be intentional or unintentional. This is something that can be very natural phenomenon just because of maybe some maladaptive coping strategies someone might have adapted or adopted from their like parents or previous generation. Like it could be normalized in the household. So some reasons are that some people might use triangulation to seek reinforcement and support for their own views. Maybe because they have a lack of confidence in their own emotions or views or some form of insecurity.
Own
Conflict
agenda.
avoidance. Yeah, it's their own agenda. Um, mhm. Another reason could be avoiding conflict, right? Utilizing another person as a deflection. Hmm. Another way is to like garner support as a way of demonstrating to the other party that they're the one, like they're the correct one, not the other party. So like gathering supporters. Um, Attempting to mobilize emotion against the other person from a social group as a means of retaining control or social capital during a conflict, right? Wanting that control. Triangulation typically just means also like there's some conflict avoidance, right? Conflict is not being discussed openly. Some examples of being triangulated is maybe one person is being asked to pass on unpleasant messages to someone else, being asked to be present during private conversations that do not directly involve you, being asked to provide an opinion about a conflict between other people that doesn't involve you. And I feel like a lot of this, like we'll get into this in our South Asian piece, but it's just like literally, I'm like, wow, this is so common, right?
I think it's very normalized in the community.
Very, very. Um, I also wanted to talk about some content from this article called What is Triangulation in Psychology, published in 2023. It's a very well mined article, and some quotes is that in psychology, triangulation is a term used to describe when a person uses threats of exclusion or manipulation. Its goal is to divide and conquer. A form of manipulation, triangulation involves the use of indirect communication, often behind someone's back. So I really wanted to say this definition because it's really harsh, but it is the truth, right? Like it is a form of manipulation if you think
Right.
about it.
Intended or unintended,
Mm-hmm.
definitely. Mm.
Mm-hmm. Some more examples are if a partner or friend uses another person to create a hostile environment, they create drama or pressure you into doing those things you wouldn't otherwise do. This is triangulation, right? Peer pressure is another form of triangulation. Mm-hmm. What's
Spilling the
that
check.
smile?
Just remembering back to like our younger days, and I was like, should
Younger
have we sat there,
days.
I could be
Yeah.
with
Okay, this is my favorite part of the research.
you.
Triangulation in relationships.
I love
I
it.
related this to these a lot.
Hmm.
So, in families, if there's multiple children, right, there's this dynamic. And I saw this dynamic, I read about it in multiple sources. Like it wasn't just in one website that they talked about this. It's called the golden child scapegoat family dynamic. Have you heard of that? You're like shaking your head, yes. So, within a dysfunctional family unit, the unhealthy, toxic, and often selfish caregiver splits their moral self image and inferior self image into two distinct parts projected onto their kids, right? There's a lot of projection that's happening from the caregiver, the parent perspective that can create this triangulation. So, because of all that unhealthy, like coping, toxic, moral self image, right? All of that, one child becomes the golden child who can do no wrong, while the other becomes the scapegoat. The golden child is idolized and idealized and can do no wrong. The scapegoat, however, is devalued and can only do wrong. These projections may differ over time and change depending how the caregiver feels about the child at the time. And like a lot of comparison happens too, right? Like, look at this, look at your brother, look at your sister, they're doing this. Why can't you do this, right? That phrase is said a lot sometimes in this type of situations. Okay, in romantic relationships, the manipulator, right, or the persecutor will often bring another person into their, or I guess this is the victim, will often bring another person into their intimate relationship to create friction, confusion, and jealousy. However, the individual usually enjoys the attention, whether negative or positive, and may even let the triangulated individuals know about one another so that they can fight for attention.
The
Mhm.
rescue.
Yeah. No, no, no. So the victim, right?
Oh.
Poor me, like, brings like that rescuer to like, you know, aggravate the persecutor.
Mm.
This is often really happens with like maybe like a couple, but then a coworker, right? Like that type of dynamic can show up in there.
Tell me if I'm reading this right. So what I'm imagining is like a long time ago I had a client who I wasn't working as like with the couple, but a long time ago I had a client who would tell me like I said to my husband, like this look at this like husband of my friend and like
Yeah,
he's so amazing because he does XYZ and like bringing in this unknown person into this conversation as he's the, what we're working
ideal. Yeah,
towards. But this person doesn't, this like husband's friend doesn't get involved. So that
right.
wouldn't be triangulation, right? Or
So
would it?
it would, I would say, without
Mhm.
them knowing, the triangulated
Okay.
person knowing,
So
right?
they don't have to
That,
really come in and rescue, but they can
yeah,
be used unintentionally
as a
to
rescuer or hero,
flip
right?
the
Like,
script. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. So
Because
really the
that,
way
if
I'm
you think
seeing
about
this.
it, that's still not, honest, open communication. Like the comparison, like you're you're creating this. You're even though the person who's being triangulated doesn't know in the moment, there is triangulation still happening. That's
Right.
manipulation in a way.
Got it. So really the idea of triangulation basically is using a third person, a third party to gain some kind of leverage and advantage
Mm-hmm.
from the victim's
Exactly.
point of view.
Exactly.
Mm.
Exactly. And the conflict usually is between the victim and the persecutor. But I would say, like in the triangle of that graphic, the arrows go on all three sides. A persecutor can also bring in a third party. Like it's not always the victim.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
I think this tends to happen because it depends on, I think it's quick, in
Mm-hmm.
communication. We tend to shift our needs, our protective needs, our like acting out defensive needs really, really quickly. So I think being the victim, being the persecutor, and being the rescuer can shift really quickly,
Right. Right.
like the roles itself.
Yeah. Very, very fluid.
Yeah.
And um, again, like another quote from this article, that triangulation can be unintentional, or the individual may not realize the true impact of their behaviors. People could employ specific triangulation strategies to avoid confrontation or perhaps tricky circumstances. Maybe they are shy, or they could be uncomfortable speaking up or resolving an issue directly with the person involved. So then they get a third party involved, yet to potentially fuel the fire even more.
Mm.
So, what does an impact of triangulation look like? So, when someone experiences triangulation, they may fear what other people think, feel humiliated, concerned, self protected, right? There's lots of, like conflict avoidance, right? No open communication, all those, relationships could form misconceptions. There's just lot of, it's really like a snowball effect once triangulation occurs. So, once, learning about these things builds self awareness, but it's important to kind of address also like the do's and don'ts with triangulation. The very well mined article hits that. So, some don'ts are like not to react emotionally, right? Don't respond quickly to surprising news. So, if you are the person that is experiencing triangulation or being pulled in, right? Try not to respond quickly to surprising news. Try not to lose your temper or not lose control of your feelings. Don't make promises or commitments that will only hurt your relationship with people whom you trust and love.
Mm.
Right? What are some do's? You can take a step back and consider facts. Separate the facts from feelings. Clarify anything before acting on it. Stay in touch with loved and trusted ones in your life, right? If there's other people in your life that you want to talk this through, you can, about the situation, whether you're the third party that doesn't need to be there.
Mm.
Maintaining a healthy balance between family, friends, work, and free time. Removing yourself from a conversation if you sense it turning into an unhealthy or dysfunctional one, right? So setting those boundaries and maintaining your self-control. So what are
Mm.
some ways that, how can you set those boundaries? How can you remove yourself if you realize you don't want to be involved? Some verbiage, some scripts that you can use is that
Mhm.
I don't want to be involved in that, right? That could be very simple. I hear you, but I don't want to be involved in that. I prefer not to be involved. I feel uncomfortable being present during this conversation and I'm going to leave now.
Mm.
I feel like that one would be a little bit harder for me to do.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just
It's
gonna
more
leave.
direct.
It's more direct, yeah.
Yeah.
I would and this verbiage is more if like a person is talking to you, like
Mm.
almost venting, or I know we talked about this in a previous episode, like what's venting versus like healthy conversation or healthy processing. If they're like venting and kind of you're being triangulated in a specific conflict between
Mm.
one person and another person, like you can say, I would prefer it if you discuss this with them directly, with
Yeah.
whoever they are talking about.
That's
Yes.
awesome.
And then last suggestion is, I am happy to discuss this with him later, but how do you feel about this? So like
Mm.
focusing on the person. I like
Yeah.
that one. I'm like,
Yeah. Because
oh,
it's all about like projecting and you turn
redirect.
it right back around. Tell me
Redirection.
you.
Yes, it was
That's
really
a good
cool. I
use.
was like, oh, this one's a good one.
Mm.
Uh,
Love that.
so I like scripts and verbiage, just like for you to have something concrete. So that's why I was like, I need to share this, which I thought it was really
That's
nice
awesome.
that the authors of this article shared that from the Very Well Mind article, or Psychology Today article. Sorry, that's the
Mhm.
one those scripts are from. So that was my research. Any questions, thoughts before I move on?
I did have one at the very beginning, and I just want to
Okay.
process it. I've already kind of thought about it, but I want to process it.
Yeah.
So the first thought I had was how, like, what distinguishes triangulation and when that's not
Mm,
helpful and that's not really serving you versus when, like, someone actually needs help and someone needs
mm-hmm,
to be present,
mm-hmm.
right? And so tell me what you think and how you feel about this, but from the conversation we had and like your research, what I'm picking up on is the difference would be triangulation happens when the victim or the person who feels utterly powerless is
Yeah.
trying to change their power, gain more power.
Mm-hmm.
Versus if someone's genuinely looking for help, it's because they just want validation. It's not about
Yeah.
power. They want validation. They want maybe safety,
Yeah.
emotional safety, physical safety, etc. If
Right.
they're calling in
Right.
someone for help. Versus in triangulation, it's all about not exactly validation, but tell me I'm right and tell them that they're wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no like,
No,
that's
I
how I'm picking
agree.
up on it. What do you think?
I agree with you. I think the difference, I think that's really important to make that distinction. And I would agree with you. I would say that it's the intention,
Yeah.
right? Like, what's the intent behind bringing that third party in? Is it really
Right.
like to make that gain, feel more powerful, feel more in control, remedy the situation short term, feel like you have a support, avoid directly confronting the conflict, right? Avoiding direct
Be right.
communication, be right? Or
Yeah.
is it, I need a person or a loved one or a friend to process this, to help me figure out how to practice healthy problem solving behaviors, conflict resolution behaviors, right?
Totally.
Like it's almost the outcome makes a difference too, right? Like in triangulation, the outcome can be toxic, right? It could be chaotic. It could just lead to like more miscommunication, misconceptions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if the outcome of like you processing some a conflict with someone is like, okay, now I feel better about how I feel. Now this is how I'm going to address the conflict. I'm going to sit down and do these steps, take these steps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was my little take on it.
I just felt like I had that thought immediately as soon as we started talking about triangulation. I was like, oh, this is important for us to like talk about because I
Yeah.
think when you're listening and you're not really familiar with these concepts, right? It's easy to like for someone, especially if someone's already kind of a people pleaser or having a lot of self doubt, already
Yeah.
feeling like a victim. Sometimes it's hard to figure out, not feeling like a victim, but maybe like feeling powerless. It's hard to figure
Mm-hmm.
out if your inner critic up here, that voice is saying,
Mm-hmm.
oh, stop playing the victim, or see,
Yeah.
you're triangulating, you're part of the problem. Then you can't
Yeah.
receive the help that you need in that moment. So it's important to kind of break down what it is and what it is not.
Yes. And it's like triangulation doesn't mean you can't reach out for support to your loved one, right? It's the intent
Mhm.
behind it and the outcome. I would
Yeah.
say those two are important. All
And that,
right. So believe it or not, I search hard, and maybe I missed this if anybody else wants to send any articles our way, but I did not find anything on
Really?
triangulation with I looked on TikTok, I looked at
So
Instagram, I
surprised.
looked Google. I mean, there were some articles that pulled up about like communication, which we've talked about in the past, but it wasn't specifically about triangulation. And I'm like, this is a huge topic that could be so relevant.
I believe it. I mean,
Yeah.
triangulation is a very like term heavy and it's
Yeah.
specific to
Yeah.
the profession, right? So like
Yeah.
even though I'm sure if you really me and you sat down and talked about it and we talked about it with other people, we'll find a plethora of examples in the community of how families do triangulation. But
Yeah.
just because
Yeah.
we do it doesn't mean there's going to be
Oh,
research into
yeah.
it. So
No,
that's
I was
fair.
just like, just because there's so many other like mental health terminology that has been
Mhm.
explored, and but this one hasn't yet. Hopefully, it's in
But
the works
this
right now as we speak.
would be a gold
Maybe, yeah,
pot.
yeah,
Maybe. I hope so.
yeah,
Because this is
yeah,
amazing. Like there's plenty to be done and researched here. There's plenty of
exactly,
opportunities to actually see it in the community, I'm fairly certain.
yeah. So instead of like sharing research on that, I decided to like just jot down some thoughts of my own reflection when it comes to the South Asian culture, right? In my opinion and my view. I think there's very a lot of examples that exist, right? There's family members communicating through a third party, parents using their children to communicate with each other. I've seen that a lot. This culture is very collectivist culture, so parents involving other family members to make decisions or address conflicts.
Ooh,
Um,
I have one thing to add to that. I want to speak to that
yeah.
real quick because you brought up a really good point. We are a collectivist culture,
Hmm.
and it's again, right, differentiating like what is harmful triangulation versus what is maybe somewhat of a helpful collectivist culture of
Yeah.
incorporating other people is important to differentiate because it gets tricky though, right? Because
Yeah.
sometimes it can easily, I think, cross and blur the line between what's
Hmm.
triangulation and what's maybe a little bit more helpful use
Right.
of collectivist
Right. It's a
value.
big distinction. And
Yeah.
I want to emphasize, like, I agree with you, like being a collectivist culture, like there's nothing wrong with that. Like that could be actually protective factors and strengths to that.
Yeah.
Um, it's just that sometimes within a collectivist culture like the South Asian culture, it can be really easy to engage in triangulation, right? It's like that blurry line. It's that blurry line. It's a fine line. um like to me, like all those things when there's a conflict occurs in a family or between a couple, like all relatives flood to that house to have a discussion together, right? Right, or like if a kid, like a cousin or someone's child is having a hard time in life or just making mistakes, everybody will crowd and like have a chat with that kid, right? Like there's just and again, it could be a strength in some ways, but then again it could become like in a way triangulation where you're bringing like the entire family when this conflict could be addressed between the two parties only.
Yeah, definitely. I actually have an example of both
Hmm.
when it's helpful and when it doesn't serve. I've actually, now that I'm thinking about it, like, yeah, we have, I mean, right? We have, at least we used to up until the last couple of years, a lot of family in Dallas.
Hmm.
And because we're all pretty like close knit, very family oriented, we also lived pretty nearby each other. And
Yeah.
I can think of two examples right now. I don't want to get into too much details in case they're listening, but I can think of two specific examples of how there was triangulation where this particular couple that I'm thinking of involved unintentionally, but then it became intentional after the unintentional, involved the entire family into
Oh
their stuff.
wow. Oh
And
wow.
that was messy, as you can
Hmm.
imagine, because there wasn't a lot of trying to connect. It was a lot more
Yeah.
like take my side.
Hmm.
But on the other hand, I've also seen like again a different couple kind of pull in family in a way to bridge the gap
Hmm.
between two different kinds of thinking within the family. And that the goal was very much connection. And so that one I see more as serving because the goal was never tell them they're wrong, tell them, they're wrong. It was more so about helping bridge the lack of understanding and bridge more empathy,
Mm-hmm.
like bridge their connection with one another. So, like, this is a great example of how using our community,
Mm-hmm.
our collective, can be helpful
Yeah.
when the intention, like we were talking about, right? When the intention is not to point fingers and blame and take back power, when the intention is all about connection.
Mm-hmm. And, in situations like this, sometimes when the elders get involved, they want that power, right?
Yeah.
Like, or like, oh, like,
Sometimes.
you don't know anything. Let me call your older cousin. Let me call your aunt. Let me call your uncle. You don't know anything. They'll teach you. They'll talk
It's
to
not
you.
helpful.
Yeah. There's that, but it's important to make that distinction. You're absolutely right.
Mm.
So I was a little saddened that I couldn't read some juicy South Asian articles about triangulation because as I was doing the general research, I was like, yes, I can't wait. Can't wait to read the Instagram posts, the TikTok videos, or, some articles. But maybe someone out there is already working on a triangulation article. And if you're inspired, please do so and send us the link because we would love to read it. So are you ready for my story?
Totally ready for your
Okay.
story.
So I feel that I have experienced triangulation a lot growing up. And I might have unintentionally also engaged in triangulating someone else unintentionally. I'm reflecting back. And I know we talked about this, I think, especially within the South Asian culture, conflict avoidance, passive aggressiveness can be common, and triangulation can be the result of that. I know I have touched this in the past, probably in previous episodes, but I wanted to zoom in a little bit more when I was 17 years old. I was in high school. My parents were having a conflict, and it was pretty pivotal. That conflict in the family really shook up the whole household. It's pretty traumatic for me and my sister. So I won't go too much into the detail about like what the conflict itself was, but I experienced triangulation a lot as the elder daughter. Both my parents would talk to me separately about the conflict and share their opinion with me, their daughter in high school, right? At that time, like, I was worrying about finishing my lab report, finishing my school. And I just remember like taking some time out to just sit with my parents, and each one of them separately would sit with me and tell me what's going on, and kind of what their what their opinion is. Or kind of at one point my mom was asking me for my opinion, asking me to like take her side and stand up for her, which was really hard and felt uncomfortable at that time because I love both my parents and I didn't want to be like taking sides. Like, and looking back, of course that was not okay, right? But at that time I didn't think like that. I just wanted things to be better. I wanted to be the rescuer. So I was that third point in the triangle. Being the eldest daughter, I also experienced triangulation for being responsible for my sister and her mistakes. So at times, it felt like I was at fault when she made decisions or made mistakes. Some phrases that I heard my parents say to me was that she listens to you, you talk to her about changing this behavior. Um, it was almost like I experienced parentification. Mm-hmm. I was expected to parent my sister when I was just her sister. I remember when there was a lot of times where my mom would get upset at a decision my sister made in college, right? She was across the country in New York. I had no play or no input in making that decision for her or telling her to make that decision. But then my mom would get upset at me. And kind of find a way to kind of blame me and be like, no, it's you, like, or like, you were the one who caused it. So this was like more like my role shifted from like I played the rescuer role sometimes with my sister, but I also played um like I was triangulated in a way to like be the victim, or not victim, sorry, like I was getting blame a lot for my sister. So would you
Mm.
say that would be persecutor? No, my mom was a persecutor,
I think
but
I think in this example, it would be helpful to see it as like you were the scapegoat in this
yeah,
example, and she was
hmm
like the untouched golden child, right? Like,
right,
even though
yeah,
it's her action, it's not her problem,
yeah,
it's yours.
yes, exactly.
Mm.
Um, and like this would happen repeatedly where she would make mistakes or behave a certain way, and my mom wouldn't approve, and she would kind of come at me and be like,
Mm.
she wouldn't be doing this because if you hadn't done this, or if you hadn't done this, then she wouldn't have done this, right? I feel that um, more recently, I have learned to set boundaries. So, like, using those phrasing that we talked about, I feel like I've already started using that with my sister and my parents, right? She's a grown adult. So, I like use the phrasing, like, that's between you and us, you, like, your conversation between each other. Like, I'm not involved in that.
Mm.
And I always say, like, joke around that I've retired being my sister's second mom, right? She's a grown person and I don't make decisions for her. She makes her own decisions. And I don't want to be involved in parenting my sister, right? She's my sister and my sister only. And yeah, I definitely, and I would say, like, when I started setting those boundaries, like, oh, I don't want to be involved in it, that's between you two, like, my sister and parents actually, like, respected me about that. I was surprised. I was like, oh, I thought they would get upset. Like, oh, like, they might say, like, you don't care. Like, you need to be more involved. But they respected that, which was really nice. Um, I would say in friendships too, growing up, I experienced a lot of triangulation where it was like almost as if like if if it was a group of three of us, right, three friends, and the other two had a conflict, I would be the third party, the rescuer, and kind of get involved and listen to each, be the mediator. I played that role a lot, the mediator role.
Peacekeeper.
It's a funny story though. Like, there was one time two of my friends had a conflict, and I was dating my husband at the time. This was when I was in college, and these friends were phone call distance, like long distance. They weren't in college with me, and I remember, like, feeling like in the middle, like they both were mad at each other. They were both talking to me, and I just didn't know what to do. I wanted to, like, make things better, and Aliman was like, oh, like, what I do is I just call one and then tell them to hold on, and then call the other person and merge, and then we just talk it out. And I don't know what I was thinking, but I did that. It did not go well. It did not go well. I called the two friends. I did this exactly what he said. I called one, said hold on, called the other, merge, and they started saying hello, and they got mad at me and they hung up.
That backfired real quick.
Yes, I feel the fire trying to be the rescuer. It wasn't healthy. I learned that the hard way, that it doesn't work like that for everybody. And that's not my role, right? Like, it's not my responsibility to help two people mediate a conflict. Like, they should be able to do that by themselves through open communication. But that was just a funny example I wanted to share of how sometimes the way that boys make things work doesn't mean everybody else does. I, like, still laugh at that. We laugh about that till this day. We're like, I would be like, do you remember when you made me do this? And he'd be like, oh, don't remind me.
Remember when you gave me
That
that
was a
really bad
disaster.
advice?
What?
So do you remember when you gave me that really bad advice?
I gave you bad advice?
No, like you say that
Oh.
to Yaman.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh goodness.
He was like, don't remind me every time I bring it up. That was a disaster. And I'm like, you brought that disaster on. He was
I
like,
think
he was
that
like, I just gave my advice. It was your fault taking my advice. I was like, whatever.
I suppose he has a smidge of a point.
Yes, he does. He does. But I
I
will never
suppose you're
forget that
eager to try
instance. That was
it.
like the epitome of the worst case scenario of being triangulated.
Yeah, that was a no-win situation for anybody there.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's so funny. I mean, I have to imagine if Aliman tried this, it was with friends who wanted to reach out, who
Mm-hmm.
were already there about to reach out, but there's
Yeah.
maybe that ego didn't want to press that button, and so he helped them out a
Mm-hmm.
little bit. But
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would also,
they
like,
did try
say,
at home.
like, yeah, I would say, like, there's, like, I know the victim, persecutor, and rescuer is, like, not fixed, but I would say I've been on that other end too, of, like, being the victim, not bringing in, like, the rescuer, but the rescuer kind of wanting to be in. Like, when I was a teacher in the beginning of my first year teaching, I was struggling a lot, and my, like, close teacher friend, like, that I would teach the same grade level with, right?
Mhm.
I was struggling a little bit. I would process things with her, seek her support. But instead of kind of openly communicating with me and saying, like, hey, like, these are the things you should go to this the principal, like ask for support. She went to the assistant principal herself and
Mm.
told the assistant principal this is what's happening with Michelle and that was like, I didn't like that. I like wanted her to directly communicate that with me instead of going through the assistant principal. So
Yeah.
lots of different roles I've played.
And that's a good example too of how like triangulation isn't just when someone
You're the
brings in a
rescuer.
third party, even if
Yeah.
someone sees it and then involves themselves, it becomes triangulation.
Yeah. That teacher was trying to be the rescuer, but it was like, not healthy. Um, and was trying to get that third party. Like it was almost like, I know like this is not the best word for it, but like backstabbing or like talking behind someone's back. Like that's another form of triangulation,
Yeah,
right?
almost like a betrayal. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, that would have been, again, like a different case, right? If she had asked you, do you need help? And you had said, yes, I want help with this. A
Yeah,
whole other
let's
thing
go
that wouldn't have been
together to the
triangulation.
assistant principal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But doing that for you, not
Right.
helpful. Yeah.
Right. So
Mm.
those are my
Those are good
experience. I'm sure I can
examples. You have
list
a
so
lot.
many. Yeah, I'm sure I can list. Probably haven't even thought like half of them. There's just so much.
Mm.
It's just
Yeah.
so natural, like you said. I mean, I feel guilty of sometimes triangulation as well, or like triangulating my sister a lot. Like in the beginning, when I was having a lot of insecurities about my relationship, I would really like bring her in and like talk things through with her over and over again. And at that point, like the intent was more of the insecurity, like fulfilling that insecurity and resolving it in that moment. It wasn't really healthy of like wanting to process and then doing direct communication, right?
Mm.
Like, so I would say I triangulated other people into my conflicts a lot because of all the self work I needed to do, right? Like I had a hard time working through my insecurities or anxiety. All those things led me to triangulate as well unintentionally.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Now, those were some really good examples of this topic.
Thanks.
And all of like very different examples. So I hope,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was a really good picture of what all kinds of ways triangulation can look. So I hope,
Yeah.
our listeners really get that too.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah.
Crazy
We didn't
stories.
even need a
Don't,
South Asian research version. You did a really good job with that.
there you go. Don't do an unintentional three-way phone call.
Don't.
If you get anything, take that from this podcast episode.
Oh, yeah. Don't do it. Don't try this at home, kids.
Oh, exactly.
Okay. You want to hear my story?
Yes, I'm ready.
It's pretty much more or less pretty similar to what you
Mm-hmm.
said, right? Because again, like we've been saying since the start of this episode, triangulation is very much like rampantly
Mm-hmm.
existing within our
Yeah.
cultures. And that could be for a lot of reasons. Maybe the collectivist culture kind of feeds into it sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe our collectivist and like respect your elders and the local, like maybe all of that funnels into this idea of we can't be direct, and so we try to find all these indirect power moves and trying to get other people on
Mm-hmm.
our side. And whatever the reason, I think that is just very, very prevalent in the culture.
Yeah.
So I mean, I see this all the time with clients too, like particularly South Asian clients. um, Very similar, echoing kind of what you said, Michelle, right? Like my mom says this, and then like my dad will say this, and they'll try to get me to peacekeep or like talk to the other person. And like,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's not exclusive to our culture, but like for all the reasons that we talked about, it's very like prevalent. And so almost every single client I've worked with in some way, shape, or form at some point, we've talked about triangulation.
Mm-hmm. I would agree.
It's
It's
just everywhere.
it is everywhere.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
It really is. And my
At my
story was
core.
like very, very, very similar to that too, except for one little tiny caveat. I really early on, like even like my parents, right, would sometimes get into this like triangulation. Sometimes in like, at least from what I can remember, I don't think it was ever anything serious. I think it was more like
Mm-hmm.
silly little small things from what I
Mm-hmm.
remember. But then again, as we've established, I've tuned out a lot of my childhood. So I don't know. But from what I can recall, when they would try to do this with me, I was really, 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 really well known for just always being like, I don't know. Don't ask me. I have no idea. Like I was very, even at that age, very firm on like not being involved in that. And I don't know if at one point maybe I did ever do that. And then I
Mm-hmm.
felt really guilty and bad. And so I stopped. I don't know if I did that. I don't have a recollection of it, but I imagine I might have. Because my motivation for not getting involved ever in triangulation attempts is primarily because I wanted to not disappoint one person. And like it felt
Mm-hmm.
like choosing sides. And
So it's
back then I had this like,
avoidance.
yeah, and like I had this huge, huge like aversion to like taking sides and like even
Yeah.
back then I would always be like, no, 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 I'm not gonna like no, I'm not, don't involve me.
Yeah.
So, you know, whether it was like between mom and dad, like I saw this sometimes even, you know, with like little kids, like my little cousins, they would
Yeah.
get into a little tiff and they're like, you know, like look at this person. And I was like, figure it out.
There you
And
go.
then, you know, even sometimes with like my grandmas and like their kids, like grandma and mom or grandma and dad or grandma
Mm-hmm.
and aunt, like if they would really get into it, I'd be like, I'm hungry. You know, I would like just get out of there and like not involve myself. And I remember that that just became a thing because it kept happening and they kept hearing me say that and they would just be like, oh, of course, I knew she's not going to get involved. And it
Mm.
became even more funny because I actually have a distinctive memory. I think in high school, there was a movie that had come out and it was a Telugu movie that came out and there was
Mm-hmm.
this dialogue in the movie and it was basically I'm going to say it in Telugu and I'm going to translate it.
Okay.
The dialogue was Nanu involveku Raugaru. And what that means is don't involve me in this Raugaru, right? So he's
Uh,
basically saying exactly what I've always said. And when I've heard that, that is what I started saying again.
that's so
So it
funny.
just, yeah, I would always just be that person. And so before I would even say
Yeah.
it, they would say it to me. They'd be like, Anika, and they're like, oh, no, 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 she's not going to get involved.
Uh,
But I think it was good too because I think it added a little bit of that like levity and it added that
yeah.
boundary of like we don't need to do that. We're not going to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
Having said that though, I don't think I had necessarily the same kind of boundary when it came to friends. I feel like when it came to friends, I would get really like pulled into it and dragged into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would engage, but I would never take sides. So I still kind of kept fast on that boundary of not taking a side, but I would engage. I would just play the peacekeeper. So I'd be like,
Yeah.
well, I can see your point, but I can see their point. I'm like, do you guys
Mm.
see that?
Diplomatic.
I know, very diplomatic, very always on the fence, very,
Such a therapist. You were a little
I
therapist
know,
early on.
right? This is why I say, like, I literally was made for the field.
Yes, you were. You were a little peacemaker from the beginning.
I know, truly. So yeah, that's kind of how I remember growing up, like triangulation, how it worked is primarily people would engage. I'd be firm on like not engaging, or at least
Mm-hmm.
not taking sides in that part. Um, One thing I did notice though as a therapist, once I was a therapist and once I started working with
Mm-hmm.
couples, oof, there are some couples who really try to pull you into that. And again,
Really? They
oh
try to
yeah, definitely.
triangulate the therapist.
Yeah, they're trying to triangulate with therapists. I'm like, you're pulling a fast one over me. And at first, it was really scary to me though, because this was like the first few clients that I had at the time that were couple clients. And
Hmm.
so I wasn't used to the dynamic enough. And so the first time it happened, I was like, what? I was a little bit like, oh my God, what do I do right now? But,
Yeah.
you know, once I took a deep breath, I was like, I don't think anyone's right in this situation.
Hmm.
You know, because when you get that heightened too, like that's what they were looking for. They were looking to me, the therapist, the third party, the expert, quote unquote expert, to point at one of them and say, you did wrong. How could you do this? And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
you realize that's not the point of like therapy though, right?
Yeah.
Couples therapy especially.
Yeah.
So the more and more that happened, they would get furious or they would just kind of like I have this one particular client that I'm thinking of too in the couple, and she would really try hard to get me to say like she was right and he was wrong repeatedly. And so I would repeatedly put up this boundary with her. And I could see every time I did it, she would go from like, yeah, but, and like she would be literally like jumping into the screen. And then once I started redirecting, she just kind of sit back and like, almost like she was coming. And I was like, I see you though. Like, I see where you're coming from. Like, I
Yeah,
really
very
do. But
validating.
this isn't helpful. And so I
Right.
would keep basically like reiterating, you are valid, but why are they also not valid? Right. And so I
Mm,
would keep bringing it back to, that U-turn of like, yeah, how does that make
yeah.
you feel? Okay. How do you think that makes them feel? And
Yeah.
like keep putting it onto them when they try to throw the ball to me. I'm like, no, I don't want the ball. Take it back.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's like basically, it's a good basic image of triangulation. Like you're involving that third person and just
Yeah.
giving the issue into their hands when it's
Yeah.
not
I don't want the
theirs.
hot potato. I don't want it.
Mm-hmm.
It's your hot potato,
Yeah.
not mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, as a therapist, what I found helpful in that redirection is, I think, first off, validation. Because when you're at that level, you are engaging in triangulation because you want to blame and you
Mm-hmm.
don't want that blame to be on you. So being able to validate and say, like, no, I get where you're coming from. I really do, tends to
Mm-hmm.
like, lower those walls. So I
Yeah.
think as a therapist, what I found is like, one, being able to validate helps reduce that. And then two, helping them take accountability and like responsibility for whatever part they play. Because one of the like biggest things I keep telling couples, clients all the time, if you start to see each and every single problem as you both somehow contributed, it's going to be so much better for you than if you keep seeing it as one person is to blame. Who is it going to
Yeah.
be?
Yeah.
But if you keep seeing it as, okay, we've both played a part in somehow getting to this place, then you're able to practice more empathy. You can,
Mm-hmm.
lessen or just completely avoid creating that defensiveness. And so really like, one, validating, and then two, taking responsibility for whatever your part is, and then showing that empathy and understanding to whatever the
Yeah.
partner's
Yeah.
responsible part is.
Yeah. You don't
I think
attack
is
each
really
other,
big.
you attack the problem together.
Yes,
Like I've heard that a
exactly.
lot.
Not you
Yeah.
versus I, us versus problem.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. So yeah, that's kind of what I remember from all the examples that I was thinking of for triangulation. And
Yeah.
I think the general theme of it all though is intention, right? That's what I'm taking away from
Mm-hmm.
today
Me
is, what
too.
is the intention here? What do you
Of
need?
involving a third party. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Where are your intentions? Is it to resolve an insecurity? Is it to avoid conflict? Is it to feel powerful?
Mhm.
Which one is it?
Which one?
Should
Dun,
be none
dun.
of the above.
Good question.
I know. But like I think it's really important, like you mentioned, to address. And I think you mentioned this in your reflection in your story too, of like how unintentional it can be, how easy it
Yeah.
is to create this dynamic. I think you did a really good job explaining when you like talked about your point of view as a therapist, right? Or like what your experience when in your childhood that you don't even realize, right? Like our parents don't realize this could be more of like an intergenerational thing where these types of behaviors are just passed down. They're modeled, right? And it's normalized. But self-awareness is key.
Mhm. It's the first step.
It is
Key
the
to the
first
first step.
key to the first step. There you go. It's not
Yeah.
the key. The key is the work. Yes.
The key is always the work, the long, hard effort,
Yes.
but
Yes. But I'm
necessary for any
so
growth.
yeah, but I'm so proud of you too. Like I feel like your work as a therapist, really observing these interactions has also made you really self-aware about how you handle these
Totally.
situations
Yeah.
personally, which is so
Oh my
cool.
gosh. I just find it really funny every time I find, like, the more that we do these podcasts and the more that I think back to the old times, it like totally tickles me when I remember little examples of how little Anusha was already
Mm,
such a little like miniature version of a therapist. And I'm always like,
yes. And
this
she was
is
so good at little Anisha is so good at setting boundaries. I'm so proud of her.
in some
Doesn't
ways. In
involve
other
me.
ways, she
Doesn't involve
sucked.
me. Doesn't involve me. Well, I love that though. Like instead of being like, I mean, it was that
I
doesn't
never
involve
thought
me.
about it like a
Intention was a
boundary.
little bit of people pleasing behind it, but like,
True.
but it
True.
saved you from more of like experiencing more of like more impact from
Mm-hmm.
triangulation or things like that, right? Like you're able to set that boundary. Like it doesn't involve me. Doesn't involve me.
I'll take that win. I didn't even think
Yeah,
about it as like that was a boundary, but like, yeah, totally.
it
I
was. I
think
would
that
say.
was one of the very few, if not one, boundaries I've set as a kid. That was really cool to think
Go
about.
little
Yes.
Anisha.
Thank you for your
Woohoo. Go little
insight.
Anisha. Yes. Go little Anisha. I'm so proud of
Go
you. I'm proud of
Nisha.
this Anisha too.
Oh goodness. I really love these podcasts because we really
Yeah.
get to dig deep and like dive deep into like our past and like
Yeah.
lots of moments for like self-love and appreciation.
I know. I'm like thinking back of all the unintentional triangulation I probably did too. Like, I feel like I've definitely triangulated
Sure.
you. Like in high school, like those card talks of me just
Oh,
going
those
on
card
and on
talks.
and on about hours. Like, what do I do, Anisha? Blah, blah,
I probably hit
blah.
you with my very famous, well, I can see your side,
Yeah,
but
I do remember that.
oh, my poor friends are probably like, why can't you just be on my side, damn it?
Yeah. But you were playing the healthy rescuer in a way, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
were bring
Refusing
like
to rescue
yeah, yeah. You were making those U-turn comments
the U-turn.
appropriately.
Ooh, day one. I'm sure there must have been times though. I have to imagine I wasn't always like that
Yeah.
boundary oriented. I have
Yeah.
to imagine there might have been a few times I slipped up. I
Yeah.
can't think of any though,
Yeah.
off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Would have happened with friends for sure. Definitely not
Yeah.
with family.
Well, I almost
Those are,
wonder like if this happened, like you said, in your early age and you just developed this protective factor of setting this boundary, like, oh, this was
it
painful.
really
Like,
might have.
right?
Yeah.
Like you might have blocked it out, right? Like you might have been like, oh, this was not okay. I'm gonna build
Painful.
this boundary for
Mm.
myself to protect myself.
I really think that's what it is. I don't know if it was
Yeah.
with a friend and I like got burned because of me choosing a side. I don't know if it was like with like maybe my family and like I
Parents.
hurt
Yeah.
maybe my mom or dad and I felt really bad. But I have to
Yeah.
imagine that it wasn't just like I just was like, "Ah, I just know how to do it." Like I have to imagine it wasn't like that. I'm sure there
Yeah.
was a reason I didn't.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
Everything happens for that.
Mhm. Shall we wrap up
All
for
right.
today?
Yes.
Let's do it. So, as a reminder, if our podcast has resonated with you, our lovely listeners, and you'd like to share your stories with us or ask any questions, you can reach us at our email, talksouthasiantome@gmail.com, or you can find us on any and all the socials at the handle at talksouthasiantome. Until
Bye.
next
See you next
episode.
time.